Once Linz lost her life, the domain she had created gradually began to disappear, leaving the outside visible. Cyan raised his head, started observing one of the buildings, and noticed that it was the Lambaster Cage Hotel. Even though he didn't know how he had ended up here, he was happy since this had saved him some time. While he was distracted, someone asked why he was sparing her life. It was Lisa. As Lin's domain slowly disappeared, she began observing Cyan, reminding him that she had tried to kill him and also knew about Mist. With a calm gaze, Cyan began to observe in silence. Lisa was quite injured. She placed her hand over the wound on her other arm, and with a sad and guilt-filled gaze, mentioned that there was no reason for him to keep her alive. With an indifferent expression, Cyan turned toward her, started staring at her intently, asking if she was going to tell the others. She became nervous and replied that she wouldn't, and upon hearing this, he decided it was better to keep her alive. With a tired and confused expression, she asked what she was supposed to do now. Just before Cyan could respond, the girl and the guards opened the door and, somewhat worriedly, began running toward her. The girl panicked and with a curious expression, asked if she was okay. Seeing this, Lisa couldn't help but stay somewhat surprised. The girl approached her, clenched her fists, and started crying because she was worried about her since she had suddenly disappeared. Seeing her, Lisa's eyes filled with joy and she began to smile upon seeing that the girl was fine, asking if she was hurt anywhere. The girl approached her and gave her a strong hug. She didn't care about her own wounds, vowing never to lose sight of her again. Seeing this, Lisa couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. The guards approached them and began to observe in silence. The girl closed her eyes and started crying even more. Lisa had been the kindest person she had ever had, begging her never to leave her alone again. A light of hope began to shine in Lisa's eyes. With a kind smile, she explained that they had only been apart for a while, asking the girl to cheer up. Cyan began observing them with a serene gaze and realized that she had found what to do now. Now she could manage this place for a while since the district managers were gone, asking her to make sure that the girl wouldn't grow up to become someone like herself or Gunther. Lisa raised her head, started to look Cyan in the eyes, and despite being unsure, she accepted. Cyan approached her, sat down, started to stroke the girl's head, and with a kind smile asked her to make sure to behave well. The girl put her hands on her chest, and with a confused gaze asked if Cyan was leaving. The guards and Lisa started to look at them in silence and couldn't help but smile and feel an inner peace. Cyan's eyes filled with joy, and with a smile, he replied yes, asking her to take care of herself. He stood up, turned his back on them, and began to walk away from the area. With an uncertain expression, Lisa asked if Cyan was ever going to return. He closed his eyes, started waving goodbye to them with his hand, and replied maybe. Lisa put her hand near her mouth and while smiling said that he had to come back. Upon hearing this, a smile appeared on Cyan's face. He decided to come back. Cyan's eyes filled with sadness as he remembered that in his past life, the city was in flames and chaos. He hoped not to see that scene again next time. A few hours later, Cyan went to Mist's lair and handed Lin's dagger to Sirika. She took Lin's dagger and it began to emit a suffocating energy. She couldn't believe that Cyan had managed to purify Lin's. She was sitting on top of a stone floating in the air. With a smile, she realized it had been hard for Cyan to purify Lin's. Our boy, who had his arms crossed, asked if she hadn't sent him knowing that mission was going to be difficult. She began to point at Cyan with the dagger, and her eyes filled with joy. Upon observing him, she assumed he had many questions to ask. Cyan raised his head and with a calm gaze asked what her relationship with Lin's was, and if she was also part of Mist. A smile spread across Sarika's face, affirming that yes, she started to recall when she and Linz used to train together. But one day Linz turned her back on Sarika and began to leave, along with the ring that had been passed down only to the masters of the hall, since she didn't like where Mist was heading. Sarika started watching as her friend was leaving. In silence, Cyan took out Lin's ring, began showing it to her, asking if it was Anbari's ring. Sarika descended from the rock and landed on the ground, confirming it, revealing that it was supposed to be hers. Cyan started observing her in silence, and many questions came to his mind. She rested her hand on her waist, and just before she could speak, with a curious expression, Cyan remembered that she had just mentioned that it had been passed down only to the masters of Hall. Sarika's eyes began to shine, and with an excited smile, she mentioned that she no longer needed the ring because she was already strong enough. Cyan's attention fixed on the ring. He began to observe it in silence. He had thought that she had sent him on that mission to recover the ring. For him, this was unexpected. Karam manifested herself, crossed her arms, and with a serene expression she realized that Sarika must be resentful upon seeing that the two of them already knew each other. Syed, who was holding the ring, turned his head to one side and upon seeing Karam became somewhat confused. Sarika turned her back to them, closed her eyes, and with a smile mentioned that she was only fulfilling her promise, realizing that the minds of most people were broken by the power of the ring. Cyan and Karam remained thinking in silence, and he asked if this was some kind of test. Sarika stayed silent without answering the question. The ring began to emit a sinister aura, and upon seeing this, Cyan assumed that she was trying to see if he would be tainted by the power of the ring. He clenched his fist and with a serene gaze asked if she was going to warn him about it and say that if he also fell victim to the power of the ring, he would also be subject to purification, questioning whether she didn't like him being the successor. Upon hearing this, Karam's mind filled with questions. She placed her hand under her chin and supposed that could be the case. Sarika turned slightly towards them and with a smile explained that she was just trying to see if he was going to be a disaster for humanity or a hero, mentioning that such a test was normal for a successor, and it was possible that Karam had made a bad choice. Karam got angry and with a furious expression asked what she had just said. Cyan put the ring in his pocket and was somewhat confused, believing that Sarika had good intentions. At the same time, at Lewin Academy, the sun began to set. The dean approached the window and started watching the sunset with his arms behind his back. After instructor Nella's disappearance, the students' anxiety had grown. The dean began to turn around and with a serious expression said that he was sure this was a great burden on his shoulders, especially because he had just been appointed, but even so, he believed in him. A man approached him, asking him not to worry. It was Boris. He placed his hand over his chest as a sign of respect and with a kind smile swore to try to be understanding with the students. The dean thanked him, and Boris bowed his head before him, deciding to go take a look at the academy. With a smile, he turned his back to the dean and began walking toward the door. The dean started staring at him intently with a suspicious gaze, realizing that he had very strange mana. At that moment, Sarika, who was holding a book, entered the office and with a panicked expression apologized for being late. Her attention focused on Boris, leaving her somewhat surprised and on alert. Boris placed his hand over his chest and, with a kind smile, introduced himself as the newly appointed instructor. Boris passed by her side and said goodbye to them. She panicked upon realizing that his mana reeked of blood. She turned back and her attention fixed on him. With a piercing gaze, she noticed that he was dangerous. The dean began looking at the ground, revealing that Boris was from the capital. With a suspicious expression, he gave her the order to keep a close watch on Boris. Despite being skilled and having good manners, he possessed rather strange mana. She adjusted her glasses with her finger and accepted the order. The kind of blood smell in Boris's mana could not be erased, no matter how much he tried. With a smile, Boris left the office. It was as if death itself were walking around. The next day, someone raised a banner with the symbol of Lewin. They were knights who were excited to welcome everyone to the city of Harmony. Princess Erin appeared and upon seeing so many guards she felt somewhat confused. Leximus, who was behind her, began observing the guards and couldn't help but feel fear. Both started walking between the row of guards. Erin had heard that the number of guards had increased after the blood banquet, but so many guards was a bit overwhelming. While they were walking, someone caught their attention, and upon seeing who this person was, Erin and Leximus couldn't help but go on alert and into shock. In a corner stood Lunav with her hands resting on her abdomen. Upon seeing this, Erin couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Lunav began to show a kind smile. A few minutes later, they went to a beautiful park, and while taking a walk, Erin was glad that she was okay, and she mentioned that it was all thanks to Erin. With an expression full of guilt, Erin said that she hadn't even helped and then Lunav had been locked up because of her. Lunav closed her eyes and responded that she was fine, adding that she was a big girl. Leximus put her hand over her mouth, and she couldn't help but be impressed at how beautiful Lunav was. Erin extended her hand toward Leximus and introduced her. And while they were talking, someone appeared in front of them and greeted them. It was Boris. He lowered his head before them and introduced himself as the newly appointed instructor, asking if she was Erin. Erin began to observe him with a calm gaze and responded yes, explaining that she had heard about him. According to her, he was teaching mana applications. Boris felt honored upon hearing this, asking if she had some free time for him. Lunav's gaze fixed on him since she knew this guy was suspicious. Erin asked if right now. Boris reached out his hand to her and with a cheerful smile replied yes, adding that he was not going to take long. With an evil smile, he explained that he had been reviewing the mana ranges of the students and wondered if he could see her mana sphere. She complied and summoned her mana sphere in the palm of her hand, and upon seeing this, Boris couldn't help but feel joyful. With an insecure expression, Lunev asked her to wait a moment since she had a bad feeling. Aaron was somewhat confused, thinking that Boris was only evaluating their mana so nothing could go wrong. Boris placed his hand near the mana sphere and began to use his power, explaining that it would soon be over. But at that moment, someone grabbed Aaron's hand by the wrist, making the mana sphere disappear. Seeing who this person was, Boris went on alert, while on the other side, Aaron panicked, asking what they were doing there. It was Cyan. Aaron began to blush. He started staring intently at Boris and couldn't help but panic as his eyes filled with fury. He didn't know what Boris was doing in Lewin. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.